It's a fairy tale unlike any other.
Once upon a time, once when we were mine.
My guest tonight has sold 56 million books, yet her own life is as fantastical as any of them. She's an alchemist who turns adversities into allies and tragedies into treasure.
This is the place where I write, my casita.
Welcome to the magical world of Isabel Allende. She'll tell us about inspiration.
The character possesses me, takes over, and that's a fantastic moment.
Her views on sexism.
How do we know that if women took over the world, it would be any better?
We've already tried the other thing, haven't we? And it's a mess.
And share a few thoughts on fashion and politics.
I had an uncle who always wore red socks.
Oh, really?
Because he was a communist.
Oh, was he?
It was the textbook Latin American coup, and it was to throw Isabel Allende's life into turmoil. On September the 11th, 1973, 28 years before that other tragic September the 11th, a junta of right-wing generals overthrew the democratically elected government of Isabel's cousin, Chile's president, Salvador Allende. It was a brutal operation, and the aftermath was equally brutal. But for Isabel, the coup was to provide the impetus to take up a career that has lasted over 30 years and spawned 19 best-selling books.
You prefer writing fiction, for instance, or longer fiction, to short stories. You find the novel more fulfilling.
I like to take time telling something. A novel is like embroidering a tapestry, and you have threads of many colors, and you have time to work and time to undo things and redo them. And then one day you turn around the tapestry and there you have a pattern of some kind.
Yes.
So I love that.
Do you know a little way ahead what you're going to be writing?
No, and I have to trust that the characters, the circumstances, my memory, my imagination, dreams, what other people say, the universe will conspire to make it happen. I think it's the same with you. You sit down to do an interview and you have no idea what the person will answer. Yeah. And things start to happen between two people.
That's right.
It's the same with writing. Things happen when I sit down with a character and the character possesses me, takes over. And that's a fantastic moment.
So in a sense, sometimes a plot happens to you, as it were.
It happens by itself.
Yeah.
My job is to show up in front of the computer and sit down many hours a day, and then slowly the characters come out of the woodwork and they tell me their lives and things start to happen, and unpredictable things that I would have never come up with happen.
If ever there was a source of unpredictable things, it was Isabel's own childhood.
Santiago, capital of Chile, has a spectacular setting.
Raised in Chile in the early 1940s, almost immediately things took a turn for the unexpected.
At the age of 3, you lost your father.
He disappeared, and he went to a party and never came back. This was 1940-something, 45. And there was probably some drugs, maybe some money scandal, maybe some sex scandal. I don't know. It was very well hidden in my family and never talked about. And I never saw my father again until many, many years later when I had to identify his body in the morgue. People think that it was a very sad moment for me, but it wasn't, because he was a totally unknown person, a stranger.
Get out!
Don't you remember me?
When I wrote The House of the Spirits, I showed it to my mother.
This is your son. I named him after you.
And my mother said, 'Why did you have to name the villain like your father?' It was completely unconscious. I had no idea that I had given the villain in the book the name of my father.
Your mother was a much bigger influence in your life than she would have been otherwise.
A huge influence.
Yeah, yeah.
She's now almost 93 years old. She's still lucid, active, painting, writing to me every day, using internet, Skype. She's great.
But she still doesn't like there to be too much sex in your novels, yeah?
Well, it's that generation, you know. She says, this is private. Why do you have to write it down? People will think that you've done it.
In 1950s Chile, Isabel was a million miles away from writing about sex, or anything, come to that.
How could I? There were no role models. I mean, the only women writers I had heard of were all some spinsters in England, and they had committed suicide. No role models, really. And in Chile, or in South America, writers were male, always. But I loved to tell stories and to read stories. Although I never thought of myself as a writer, I thought I could be a journalist, maybe. Something to do with writing.
When her mother remarried a diplomat and was posted abroad, Isabel discovered another role model.
I lived with my grandfather, who was a huge figure in my life. This tough Basque, you know.
Really tough.
Tough and wonderful, with a sense of honor and discipline. And he's my super ego. Yeah. I hear his voice in the back of my head.
Yes.
You can do better. You can do more. That's not enough.
Really?
Now that I am 70 years old, I think I don't need the super ego voice of my grandfather reminding me all the things I should do. I can just relax and have a good time. I've done everything I needed to do, so what's my problem?
Yeah.
But to tell my grandfather to back off is hard. Very hard.
There was one other character that was to play a key role in the young Isabel's life. Her second cousin, Chilean politician Salvador Allende.
Salvador Allende, who was the only person from my father's family that was in touch with us, he was already a very famous politician in Chile. He had been the youngest health minister in the country. He was the head of the Socialist Party. He had beginning to be talked of as a possible candidate for the presidency.
Was he? He was a communist, wasn't he?
No, he was a socialist. When the world was divided between these two spheres of influence, the Soviet Union and the United States, capitalism versus communism, anything in between was either or. So today we have so many socialist countries in Europe, and Chile would have been one of those, but it was too early for Chile.
Well, let's take a look at that particular point, at that particular day when Salvador Allende was elected.
Oh my God, it's so moving. Look, he was so young.
No aceptarán un orden internacional que perpetúe su atraso. Nada lo podrá impedir, ni la amenaza, ni la corrupción, ni la fuerza.
I remember the day exactly. Of course. I remember the day because he came that night to my stepfather's house, and there was a meeting in the house, and they were discussing what was going to happen. Because in Chile, at the time, to be elected president, you needed 2/3 of the votes. You needed the majority, a certain percentage of the votes.
Right.
And he had it exactly. And so he had to be approved by the Congress. I think that people would have been just appalled if he would have not been appointed, but he was.
To his supporters, the new president was a hero. Allende nationalized industries, redistributed land, and handed out free milk to 3.5 million children. But to his detractors, the far-right wing and Chile's ruling elite, he represented a terrible threat. And it wasn't only in Chile that Allende's reforms caused alarm.
The communist bloc would like to see the entire world under communist domination.
The United States, caught off guard by Soviet troop placements in Cuba a decade earlier, viewed Allende as a communist, to be confronted and stopped at all costs.
It is a contest unlike any we have ever faced in our history as a nation.
The United States would never allow another socialist government in the continent. Allende was announcing it permanently,
Right.
constantly, but nobody quite believed it. I don't know why we were so innocent at the time.
In September 1970, the CIA was allocated $10 million to put an end to Allende's experiment with socialism. In uncompromising language, President Nixon set out the objective, quote, make the economy scream, and scream it did.
No, it went very bad. It were 3 years of terrible economic, political, and social crisis. They were willing to destroy the economy, destroy democracy, but get rid of Allende.
And the troubles built and built up until 73.
Until 1973, when we had parliamentary elections. And everybody thought that given the crisis, the Unidad Popular would lose votes. Actually, it gained votes in spite of the crisis. And at that point, the right decided that only a military coup could stop Allende, because elections wouldn't.
Right, well, let's take a look at that particular moment.
Oh, well. There was curfew and you could not go out. But we would see from our windows the trucks and people being arrested and burning of books and shootings. So we knew that there was a lot of violence going on.
Salvador Allende responded by barricading himself inside the presidential palace.
My fellow Chileans, this is certainly the last time I shall speak to you.
I had lunch with him 9 days before with the family. It was a family luncheon. And at the luncheon, Allende said, I'm not going to leave the presidency until the end of my term, or dead. He didn't say dead, he said, con los pies adelante, which means taken out with his feet first. Right. That's what he meant. And it seemed like such a solemn and hard thing to say in a family luncheon, but that was the climate that we were living in.
Viva Chile! Long live Chile, long live the people, long live the workers.
He would have never surrendered. He would have never been arrested.
What was the mood like in Chile?
Fear.
Fear.
Fear and confusion. In 24 hours, the country changed. Political parties were abolished. There was censorship, no free press. Chile was one of the longest and strongest democracies in the continent. We thought that something like a military coup happened in some banana republic, never in Chile. All the freedoms that we had enjoyed and we thought were our rights were eliminated.
And you decided initially to stay?
Yeah, because like most Chileans, I never expected it to last.
Right.
I thought this thing is like a sort of historical accident. And the military will call for an election and we will have democracy again. Yeah. And things will start again. So I stayed.
But the military did not call for an election, and democracy did not return. Instead, Chile was run by a dictatorship.
The police would come, not in uniform, by the way, looking like civilians. They would come into an office and take a person. And there were witnesses that the person had been taken, but then the family would go looking for the person and there would be no record of the person ever being arrested. Some would appear later after having been tortured. Most of them ended up in concentration camps in other places. And some just never appeared again. They just were killed. They died in torture. We were so arrogant, the idea that it would not happen to us. I think that the lesson I learned then is that anything can happen any moment to anybody.
Yep.
We are never safe. And that feeling of not being sure of anything and not being safe, I have carried all my life since then. And it's a good feeling because it makes me alert and realistic.
We now know that over the course of the next 17 years, at least 28,000 Chilean dissidents were incarcerated and at least 3,000 murdered.
We were talking about torture at breakfast with the kids. My kids were 6, 8, I don't know, I don't remember, but I do remember the feeling that it became like a normal conversation. I was a journalist, and we sort of communicated, the journalists did.
Yep.
And so I sort of had an inkling of what was going on earlier than most people.
With critics of the military junta disappearing daily, a journalist with the name Allende was clearly going to become a target.
And there were death threats, were there?
There were death threats, and there were many signs, and I was very afraid for myself and for my family. Thousands and thousands of Chileans left the country, and they were, most of them, young people. They lived as political refugees in Europe, in Scandinavian countries, in the Soviet Union, in different countries in South America. I went to Venezuela.
It was here, accompanied by her young husband and 2 children, that Isabel started writing the book that was going to make her famous.
When did you first write your first page of fiction?
January 8th, 1981.
And January 8th, that was the magic day. And why was that? Why did you pick that day?
My grandfather, who was very, very old, was dying in Chile. And we received a phone call that he was really dying. And I started a letter for my grandfather, almost knowing that he would never be able to read it. It was a sort of spiritual letter. It was a letter to myself, really. Barabbas came to us by sea, the child Clara wrote in her delicate calligraphy. She was already in the habit of writing down important matters, and afterward, when she was mute, she also recorded trivialities, never suspecting that 50 years later, I would use her notebooks to reclaim the past and overcome terrors of my own. And I wanted to tell him that I remembered everything that he had ever told me, all the anecdotes. He was a great storyteller, that I remembered everything, and he could go in peace because it would not be lost. But the regal carriage of his head and the size of his frame bespoke the legendary giant he would become. I think The House of the Spirits was like a crazy attempt to recover everything I had lost. My country, my family, my grandparents, my past, my friends, and put everything together in these pages. And it was something that I could carry with me and show to the world and say, this is what was, this is my world. It gave me a voice. Incredibly, it was a very successful book from the very beginning. It was translated to every European language and it became a hit. That changed my life because it allowed me to continue in a path that I would have never been able to take if it had not been successful from the very beginning. I had to support the family. So when I kept on writing, I wrote a second book and then a third, and then I quit my day job. And from then on, my life is the life of a writer, and it's great. I don't have to be serving coffee to any bosses. I don't have to worry about nothing. I just sit down and tell my stories. That's all.
In Sausalito, California, just 15 minutes drive from Isabel's home, is Allende Central. In the basement, secrets, some innocent, others not so innocent.
This place used to be the garage of a brothel because this house was the first brothel in Sausalito. But now it's Alibaba's cave where I keep all my books. My editors send me copies of the books when they do any edition, and there are 35 languages. So we keep getting books and getting books that we have to give away as fast as possible before they become yellow.
It's an amazing achievement to have got at that late stage to this preeminent position now as an author. What was the key to that, do you think? I mean, just talent, or?
No, I think it was the right time. It was right after the boom of Latin American literature.
Yep.
The world was reading Latin American writers. They were all male. And suddenly a female voice appeared. And the publishers and the public also paid attention. So I came in the right moment, and I was very lucky. I have good publishers. I don't know why my books have done so well for so long. It's a sort of miracle. It's getting so full that I don't know what to do. We need more space. I mean, life is getting complicated. When my first book was published, The House of the Spirits, it was not allowed in Chile. But people would get the book in, take the covers out, and take, and, and that's wonderful because everybody wanted to read the book. But it took many years for me, being a writer, to be able to go back to Chile.
Democracy finally returned to Chile in 1990. Isabel, now divorced from her first husband, but still living in exile, faced a dilemma.
Our children grew up in another country. And then when we had the possibility of returning to Chile, our children would not go with us.
Really?
Because by then they had grown up. 17 years is a lot of life.
Yes.
And they had grown up in another place. They were in love with people from that country. They had another language, another set of values. What would they do in Chile? So my generation was torn between staying abroad and being forever a foreigner, but staying with your children and grandchildren, or going back to Chile and start from scratch when you have nobody there anymore.
She chose to stay with her children, addressing the issue of her own cultural identity in the only safe place, her books.
Until only a short time ago, if someone had asked me where I am from, I would have answered without much thought, nowhere, or Latin America.
Ironically, Isabel's ultimate destination turned out to be the United States, the very country that had caused her problems in the first place.
I didn't trust any government to begin with. I don't trust any institution, any form. I don't trust institutions, authority, government, the police, nobody.
Yeah.
Because I know that in a minute, all of that can turn against you.
How she would fare in America, we'll discover in part 2, when we also deal with Isabel's lowest moment.
I had cried all my tears, and I had begun a book.
Her views on feminism.
And we've coped with men for how long? We could cope with anything.
And I come face to face with some of her youngest fans.
You're a fast developer.
I'm in California with author Isabel Allende. We've heard about her father, Tomas.
He disappeared, and he went to a party and never came back.
Chile's 1973 coup d'etat.
We were talking about torture at breakfast with the kids.
And her first book.
I think The House of the Spirits was like a crazy attempt to recover everything I had lost.
But what about the process of writing itself?
The inspiration comes from the stress, from the chaos, from the life lived, from experience and memory and other people's stress and melodrama. This is the place where everything gets boiled into the pot and transformed into a book.
Let's see it.
Let's go. Yeah, I'm going to show you the casita now.
That's where you do
all my work.
All the vital work.
It's a magic place full of spirits and characters.
Lead on.
This is the place where I write, my casita. And here, all around, and in that cupboard there and in there, I have the first editions of my books in every language, and they go by titles: The House of the Spirits, Of Love and Shadows, Eva Luna, Stories of Eva Luna, etc. Here, more first editions up there. And, and this little old typewriter was my first typewriter where I did The House of the Spirits. I get up very early, I walk the dogs, I have my coffee, and then I come here. And I could stay for 10 hours working, and I don't feel it. It's just such a joy to be creating something and getting into this universe and getting in the skin of all these characters. I started my first book on January 8th, and it was such a fortunate book that when I started my second book, I thought, well, just for Kabbalah, I will start the book on the same date. Also, it was convenient. It was after the holidays. So I started my book on January 8th, and it went very well. So then I did the third one, and now I don't dare change it, partly for superstition, but also for discipline. I know that by January 8th, I will sit down and write another book, but what will the book be, I don't know. Some days the writing just flows, and I have that feeling that I'm not writing it, it's being sort of dictated. And that's wonderful, because that is what I'm going to use for sure. Other days I struggle. I struggle with a scene. Now I have learned that if a scene doesn't come easily, I have to drop it. It's not meant to be. So I put it aside. But in general, it's easy.
Easy for her, maybe. But Isabel has a secret weapon.
Here I have the letters that my mother writes to me. She writes to me every day, and I write to her every day too. And they go by year. So at the end of the year in December, I wrap them up and I put them in a plastic box. This is a year of letters. And what I love about my mother's letters is that I can tell by the handwriting how she's doing. Sometimes I see the handwriting and I know she's not doing well, that emotionally she's not. Other times the handwriting, like here, is happy. The ink is happy, the paper is happy, everything is happy. And sometimes she also emails me, or she types, and then I make a photocopy and I put it here. We talk about dreams, stories, the past. For example, now I'm writing a story about, it's a love story about two old people in their 80s. So I say, Mom, how was life in your 80s? And she goes to her agenda and to her letters of the time, and she says, it was like this. And for a month, she can be telling me day by day what being 80 is. Physically, emotionally, sexually, everything. So it's a wonderful relationship. She's 20 years ahead of me, showing me the way.
Today, Isabel is taking a trip to show others the way. In Sausalito, California, this is the Isabel Allende Foundation.
Hello, everybody.
Hi, Isabel.
Hola. How are you doing? Good. Hola, Lori. How are you? See you.
I have the stuff for the foundation.
Okay.
What we do is we help women and children in need in the areas of health, education, empowerment, and protection from violence and discrimination.
And you have pictures of the twins too?
And then this is the second girl we want to sponsor
Yeah.
this year, who comes from domestic violence background.
They've grown.
I know.
They
They're
have
so
grown.
sweet.
Yeah.
They're so sweet, and they're really trying to raise money right now to get them both hearing aids.
Funded by profits from her various books, the foundation sponsors needy children.
We work a lot with people in the San Francisco Bay Area and Chile. That's where we first started doing our grants, because we could oversee them more carefully. And we've expanded in recent years, and we have grants in India and Mexico and Nepal and the Congo and all over the world.
She was sick, wasn't she?
She's been very ill. She almost died from a complication of a hernia operation, but she's back, and she's just super committed. We can get some information from her.
The foundation was set up after a family tragedy. In December 1991, Isabel's daughter, Paula, fell ill with the neurological disorder porphyria. Within days, Paula, just 28 years old, slipped into a coma from which she would never awake. Doctors treating her had failed to diagnose the condition.
That must have been an added blow to you, the thought, if only.
It was an added blow, but I realized that there was no bad intention. No one wanted to harm Paula. The circumstances determined that there was a strike in the hospital when she entered the hospital, that the doctor was, I don't know where he was. Things happen.
Things happen.
So I cannot blame anybody in particular. She was in a coma for a year. I took care of her here at home. And after her death, there was this void, this emptiness, this dark emptiness in my life.
Paula's death inspired what was to become Isabel's most heartfelt, best-loved book.
That's the book that I wish I would never had had the need to write. Near dawn on Sunday, December 6, after a miraculous night in which the veils that conceal reality were parted, Paula died. It was at 4 in the morning. She died on December 6, 1992. And by January 8th, a month later, my mother said, "What are you going to write?" I said, "I can't write anything. What are you talking about?" And she said, "If you don't write, you will die." And
you will
so
die.
that's what my mother said.
Yeah.
And she almost forced me to go to my office and sit down, and she said, "I'll come back for you." She came back 8 hours later. And by then, I had cried all my tears, and I had begun a book. And the first sentence of the book was so clear to me, it came like a voice, and it was my voice telling to my daughter, "Listen, Paula, I'm going to tell you a story so that when you wake up, you will not be so lost." Her life ended without struggle, anxiety, or pain. In her passing, there was only the absolute peace and love of those of us who were with her. For a year, I wrote what had happened during the year that she was in a coma. And I could sort out the confusion and understand, and accept it in a way, David, because before I felt that something horrible had happened and I couldn't understand what it was. And by writing the book, word by word, tear after tear, day after day, I came to terms with it. That book, it changed my life because it allowed me to enter into another stage of my life, a stage of being a mature woman with a great grief and a great loss, but not a sad person. I carry my daughter with me all the time. She died in my arms, surrounded by her family, the thoughts of those absent, and the spirits of her ancestors who had come to her aid. She died with the same perfect grace that characterized all the acts of her life. Every day, we receive at least one message from somewhere in the world, from someone who is reading or has read the book, someone who has lost a child, someone who feels connected to me because of that book. Because everybody has losses. And that feeling that you're not alone, that the spirit of Paula is touching other lives, is wonderful.
Here are some of those lives. San Francisco's Homeless Prenatal Program is a charity that helps parents living below the poverty line.
Oh, yeah.
The Allende Foundation is one of its key supporters.
The book did very well, actually. And I didn't want to touch any of the money that came from the book because I thought that I would invest that money in something that Paula would care for. And I didn't know what it would be.
Families come in here. Some women are battered when they walk through our doors. We help them get away from a batterer. I think you need to give people hope. People need to know that that there is hope for a better day tomorrow.
You just don't know. You're a celebrity around here.
Thank you. Thank you.
They all read your books. Yes.
I had a writer's block like for 3 years after I wrote Paula. I think that all the sadness of Paula's illness and death sort of sank in finally. And I was sort of paralyzed in a way. And I tried. Every day I would come here and I would try to write, but it didn't happen. And then one day I heard a friend, another writer, say, there's no such a thing as a writer's block. Your reservoirs are empty. Fill them up. And I thought, well, she's right. I felt empty inside. And so I did a trip to India. And there something happened that triggered the idea for my foundation. And we had to stop in the middle of nowhere. And there was a very old acacia tree and nothing else. And under the tree were a group of like 6 women with children. One of the women came and she handed me something, sort of package of rags. And when I opened it, there was a newborn baby in there. And it must have been born hours before. It had the umbilical cord. It smelled like no baby I've ever smelled, of ash and dirt and feces. It was just such an incredible thing. So I kissed the baby and blessed the baby and tried to give it back, but she didn't want the baby. And so in that moment, the driver came running and he pulled the baby out of my arms and gave it back to the mother and pushed me into the car. And in the car, when I could react, I said, why would she give me her baby? And the driver said, it's a girl who wants a girl. And at that point, I knew what the mission would be of my life and of the foundation.
This one is only a month and a half.
Who wants a girl? They're not valuable. They're disposable in many places in the world. And so the mission of the foundation has been to empower women and girls so that this kind of thing wouldn't happen again.
Do you have any family here?
No.
So you're all alone?
This is my
so
me,
that's
my
why
wife,
this
and
is
baby,
so
no one
important.
else.
Yeah, because you
I'm
don't
here.
have the grandchildren.
It's tremendously important to have the support of Isabel. My staff all read her books. We all love her. We think that she's fantastic. And to have someone as wonderful as Isabel supporting our work and believing in what we do every day is just, it's tremendous. It's huge.
Believe me, it is unbelievable good to have that program here. You know why? I am a first-time father. I haven't got any idea what I'm going to do with this crying baby. At least I know what I can do for a short period of time till I give it to her mom.
My daughter's mantra was, you only have what you give. And it is absolutely true. It changes my life because, of course, it changes other people's lives, but I feel that the more one can give, the more one receives.
You're going to be a senator one day. The atmosphere is so positive there and not at all doleful or anything. It's a fantastic emotion.
Well, I'm glad you liked it. It makes me cry every time I think about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. But empowering women and girls is the only thing that will change the world. And the end of the patriarchy, the end of the world as we see it today, a world in which we will share, everything will be different from what it is now. And it's only women who can do that.
Well, we've got some interesting words here, words spoken by you on this very, very topic.
I think that the time is ripe to make fundamental changes in our civilization. But for real change, we need feminine energy in the management of the world. We need a critical number of women in positions of power, and we need to nurture the feminine energy in men.
The feminine energy in men. What's that?
There is a part of a woman and a man in every one of us. We are not all male and all female. There are certain values, virtues, talents that we consider to be feminine and others that we consider to be masculine. And we think that a gender only has those attributes. It's not true. I think that it was Martin Luther King who said that power without love is reckless and abusive, and love without power is sentimental and anemic. So I think that we need to nurture more in boys those attributes that we have considered only female, and at the same time give women that empowerment that men have by education and culture.
How do we know that if women took over the world, it would be any better?
We've already tried the other thing, haven't we? And it's a mess. Let's give it a try.
Do you think women could cope?
I mean, we've coped with men for how long? We could cope with anything.
Isabel's feminist views have steered her into some unusual situations.
And you were selected for the Olympics. Not exactly in the long jump or the high jump. But how were
The
you?
high jump would have been great.
Yeah. How were you selected?
I got a message from the people who were organizing the show of the Olympics, of the inauguration of the Olympics in Italy, the Winter Olympics, inviting me to carry the flag with 7 other women. The idea was that it would be only women, and there would be one woman representing each continent and 3 athletes. And I was supposed to represent South America. And unfortunately, representing Europe was Sophia Loren, who is 6 feet tall, plus the high heels, plus the hair, and I was behind her. So you can imagine the humiliation.
Oh, yes.
Let me see.
Well,
Oh, look at that. My 4 minutes of fame. Look at Sophia Loren, isn't she stunning? And there's Susan Sarandon.
A very upbeat moment there.
Yeah, it was a splendid moment.
A splendid
Especially
moment.
for someone who can't do any kind of sport. Yeah.
Really, yes. Not table tennis, not nothing.
Nothing.
Not nothing.
I can't even play the radio.
Isabel's books and her irreverent can-do attitude have won her an army of fans around the world, and one in particular.
I have 50 versions of how we met, and they are all true.
And I have one, and she says it's both.
Willie Gordon, a California-based attorney, met Isabel when she was in the United States on a book tour in 1987.
She wrote me a love letter and said that
No, that wasn't true. He read one of my books, fell in love with the book.
Yeah.
And then with the author, didn't you?
I actually read the book and I thought, this writer talks about love the way I understand it.
I'm still in love.
Yes. Yes, that's the happy ending, and they lived happily ever after. Yeah.
With therapy, with a lot of therapy.
We just started talking, and Frank Sinatra was singing in the background, and
Strangers in the Night.
Strangers in the Night. And
the moon was
I swear to God, the next morning I called her up and I said, you know, it was really lovely. And she said, you know, I had a dream about you last night. You were on a white horse, and blah, 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 blah. And then, well, the story is she never left after that. That's really basically true. I was her knight on the white horse, except I hate horses. I think that she's one of the great writers of our time, and she's caught the hearts of so many people, and they all identify. I mean, I go all over the world with her, and it's unbelievable, the outpouring of love and affection, and she touches into people's sorrow too, and she says it for them in ways that they couldn't say it. So she has a deep pathos for humanity.
Now happily married and living in California, Isabel has finally found the good life. Or has she?
I will always be a foreigner. I will always have an accent.
Yeah.
I don't quite belong. I have a foot in Chile and a foot here. So am I American?
It would take one further tragedy to answer this question.
I was in the shower, and we got a phone call from my mother in Chile. And we always call each other on the day of the military coup in Chile. And I thought that she was calling me because of that.
Oh, yes.
And I wrapped myself in a towel and went to the phone. And my mother said, I'm so sorry, I'm horrified. And I thought she was talking about the military coup in Chile. And then she said, no, 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 turn on the TV, turn on the TV. And then we turned on the TV. Oh, God.
28 years after the Chilean coup d'etat, another September the 11th was to transform Isabel's world.
Something really interesting happened in my soul in that moment. I immediately made the connection with the military coup in Chile because it was the same day. It was the same moment. It was the same time of the day. It was also a Tuesday.
Yeah.
I felt connected. You know, one thing that when I came to this country shocked me almost was the sense of safety that Americans had, the sense that nothing could happen here, that this was a different country from the rest of the world, that bad things happened to other people, not here. And then that day, this country was shaken in an incredible way, and everybody, friends and enemies, were embracing in the streets, and people were crying together. It was a time of mourning, and the first time that this country felt vulnerability, which the rest of the world feels all the time.
Right.
And that feeling that it could happen to us. And that made me, for the first time, I felt that I could belong here, that I was like, I could understand, and they could understand me.
Finally, Isabel Allende is home.
It's a wonderful place of relaxation.
It is.
And it is also, you know what, a safe place. For someone who has always felt unsafe, this is important.
You've done the novels, you've done the short stories, you've done the memories, the tragic memories and the other memories. Is there anything you haven't done yet?
I would like to write an erotic novel.
Excellent.
Yeah, but I have to wait until my mother dies. And she's immortal, so I don't think I will ever write it.
But you could write it and just leave it with me, and I could release it later.
Okay, I'll do that.
That's fair, isn't it? Don't miss it, folks. Well, this is your happy ending.
This is my happy ending. You know what the happy ending really is? Love. I'm madly in love and in lust with a guy. Isn't that great?
That's perfect.
That's perfect.
That's the right prescription.
Yeah.
That's the right prescription.
Absolutely.